royal wedding that took place in London 4 months ago played like a scene from a fairy tale, and the media lapped it up. Events like these play a part in the British royal family's ongoing effort to rebrand itself. Like Prince William's wedding to Kate Middleton back in 2011, the televised nuptials of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have helped Buckingham Palace repair its public image, which was badly damaged following the death of Princess Diana in 1997. But what about the role played by the intermediaries, journalists in this royal rebrand? Well, the pomp and pageantry might mean little more than ratings and clicks for international media, but Britain's fourth estate is supposed to hold the country's elite to account. And they don't come much more elite or privileged than the House of Windsor, funded by the taxpayer. But is the royal reporting British audiences usually get long on deference and short on scrutiny? The Listening Post's Daniel Torrey now on the relationship between media and monarchy in the United Kingdom.
Der Hochzeit von Prinz Harry und
Prince Harry के साथ regine
On the 19th of May, the British royal family delivered the kind of global media spectacle that only it seems capable of. One that featured in news cycles across continents.
It is so exciting to be here in Windsor. It is a charming town, 20 miles outside of London, and it's really steeped in royal history.
With viewing figures in the hundreds of millions, it's little wonder the world's media were out in force.
As a journalist covering it, you felt that you were covering an iconic moment in royal history.
Well, that is some dress, Adrian. I'm still sort of just absorbing that.
Some of those prime positions that were taken by the BBC, ABC.
We do have a prime viewing spot.
Some of the other American networks were costing in the region of 6 figures every day. That tells you that the networks clearly thought they were going to get a return for their money. This is bigger than any reality TV show you're going to tune into. And this is real life.
This is a young royal marrying somebody who is A, American, B, a divorcee, and C, of mixed race. Now, a few years ago, that would have been absolutely unthinkable. You know, you can be as cynical as you like about the royal family, and I always tried to be fairly cynical when I covered them. But the fact is, the public love it.
It was like watching the ceremony was unbelievable.
Even at The Guardian, who are an officially Republican paper, they can't help but cover it because they instantly worry that they will be the only newspaper without any coverage. There was a huge amount of media attention on it, and at the same time, you don't get the hard-hitting journalism. You don't get people querying exactly how much the wedding costs and why we're still funding it.
Oh, I think the problem is lots of people don't like to talk about the numbers.
If questioning the cost of royal events can feel a touch awkward for British journalists, that's not the case for their audiences. According to a UK opinion poll taken days before the wedding, the majority of Britons opposed any public money being spent on it. The royal family says it paid for the private aspects of the ceremony, but they won't specify whether that money came from their private wealth, estimated at more than $1 billion, or from the annual sovereign grant they received from the government, $105 million this year. However, we do know that the bill for security, reportedly as much as $40 million, was picked up by taxpayers. Britain's media, covering an era of austerity, are usually quick to query public spending. But when it involves royalty, they can seem curiously coy.
Should more questions have been asked about costs of security? Maybe. But there is a tendency to avoid what we call sour grapes, to be looking to be too sort of stingy and unsympathetic. Once it became clear that Parliament did not vote in an extra £5 million to pay for the wedding, I think the broadcasters accepted that.
The funding and wealth of the royal family is something that needs much more attention. So what we've seen in Britain in recent years is a very stark contrast of inequality. So we've seen a huge rise in the number of people who are using food banks, public services, education have seen massive cuts. What we've seen in the same period is royal finances increasing. Buckingham Palace be awarded, I think it was over 300 million for renovations. So it's about making those connections to the austerity politics that are going on in Britain.
Over the centuries, the British monarchy has lost many of its formal powers. but the sovereign and the heir to the throne do still inherit certain unique privileges. Tax on the profits from their estates is voluntary and doesn't have to be disclosed. Then there are the Queen's weekly confidential meetings with the Prime Minister, which allow her to air her views on government policy. The Queen and Prince Charles also receive all memoranda from the Cabinet and have the right to veto new laws that affect them. And as a Guardian Freedom of Information request revealed, Prince Charles lobbies ministers in private meetings and letters.
Are you still writing to ministers letters like that? You've not been behaving unconstitutionally by writing letters like that?
However, during the Guardian's investigation, the government passed a law granting the Queen and Prince Charles an absolute exemption from the Freedom of Information Act, making it even harder for journalists to scrutinise the monarchy. Instead, Britain's royal correspondents tend to cover the fluffier side of royalty.
I think probably we can get a little preoccupied with the flippant. For example, if you're on a royal engagement, you know, your job is to relay what's going on. It may well be a visit to the Teenage Cancer Trust or an AIDS-related charity for Prince Harry's work. And, you know, you're often finding that your top line in the story is, wow, Meghan stepped out and bespoke Givenchy again.
There is an issue here about taking members of the royal family, holding them directly to account, as you might with a politician or a business person or whatever. Should I be shouting a question? Of course. As a journalist, the answer is yes, I should. Tradition, protocol, our DNA with the royal family determines that by and large we don't. We're a timid, feeble lot. There's no doubt about that. We ought to be bolder.
If the commercial value of royal news explains how it gets reported by Britain's privately owned outlets, that still leaves the public broadcaster, the British Broadcasting Corporation. The BBC's constitution, the Royal Charter, says its primary mission is to provide impartial news. But when it comes to royalty, critics say the BBC's coverage falls seriously short.
The BBC constantly talk about balance when it comes to everything else about politics, economics, climate change, etc. But when it comes to the royal family, simply isn't there.
The thoughtful leader, the sensible girl, and the mischievous redhead doing things with that unaffected style which has become their hallmark.
It feels as if, in many ways, the BBC is simply doing PR for the royals. Every single time there's a royal birth, they will be outside the hospital waiting, just filling time as there's nothing to really go on.
This news coming into us that there could be an announcement soon.
And every single press trip or any form of public outing is covered without any form of criticism by the BBC.
This is Batman's motorbike, which was altogether too much for William, a keen biker himself, to resist.
The BBC seem to have completely accepted that the state broadcaster should be deferential.
We put this criticism to the BBC. The press office replied that the BBC applies due impartiality to all of our output, including our coverage of the UK monarchy.
There's a saying about the British press that they're either at your throat or at your feet. And in the 1980s and 90s, the relationship between media and monarchy was more hostile. Headlines like these were common, as Britain's tabloids ruthlessly exploited royal private lives. But the death of Princess Diana in 1997 marked a turning point. Newspaper owners, accused of hounding Diana to her death, promised to keep a more respectful distance.
As for the royal household, its response to the crisis was seen as cold-hearted. And faced with a dramatic drop in popularity, Buckingham Palace began its rebrand, with a little help from the professionals.
What we can see in the royal household is a set of individuals, particularly in the Royal Communications Office, who have previously worked in various media corporations, who have a particular knowledge about how to package royal news in particular ways that will work for the news cycle. To remake the British monarchy as more modern, as more cosmopolitan, as more multicultural, and using the tools that those younger royals offer them.
I think the younger generation really understand that if they show themselves to be a bit more down to earth, whether that's by working in the army for a bit or by going to Wimbledon, if they play the game, then the media will play along with them.
The success of the monarchy's modernisation is undeniable. It's those covering them who seem stuck in the past. In 1867, Walter Bagehot, editor of The Economist, wrote, "Above all things, our royalty is to be reverenced. And if you begin to poke about it, you cannot reverence it. We must not let in daylight upon magic. Poking about is the job of journalism. But for some British journalists, the magic of royalty clearly still casts a powerful spell.
I think we got a little wave there.
There is no question we got a wave.